We are excited to have today joining us Dr. Christopher Shogren, presenting on tree and shrub pests. Dr. Shogren serves the counties of Los Angeles and Orange as the environmental horticulture advisor for the University of California Cooperative Extension. As an advisor, Dr. Shogren provides expertise in pest management of ornamental plants and water use issues affecting the development and maintenance of the urban forest. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Shogren. You may now share your slides and begin.
Thanks everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon now, I guess. So today I want to talk about tree and shrub pests. But before I get there, just kind of a little bit about what I do is I essentially work with a lot of people that send me problems, whether that's pictures or emails or whatever, and they say, hey, I have issues on my plants. What's going on? And so what I like to do myself, and I feel like a lot of my colleagues, we like to think of ourselves as plant investigators. We're just out here trying to figure out what the problems are and coming up with solutions for that. And sometimes some of these issues that come up may be a little bit more obvious what's going on. So if we're looking at this California pepper here that I got called out to look at, as I was driving up, I could see a lot of dieback in the canopy, but as soon as I got up, took a look over that hedge and saw these wonderful Ganoderma conchs on the bottom of that tree, I knew exactly what was going on. So sometimes fairly obvious, when you can see a huge fruiting body on the tree, I know there's a lot of internal decay going on here, and tree is severely compromised. Other instances, if we're talking about insects, I got called out to look at this pomegranate to see what was going on. I had a pretty good idea already in my head, like, hey, it's probably leaf-footed bugs. Go out there, and sure enough, you could see leaf-footed bugs all over the fruit of this plant. Sometimes you get called out to look at issues and it's not quite as obvious. So this is a eucalyptus that I looked at last year. There's a lot of issues that are possibly on eucalyptus, and exactly what is the ultimate cause of this decline on this tree, I don't know. It takes some investigating. It's not just easy as looking at it and saying, okay, that's eucalyptus leaf beetle or it's a disease. There's a lot of investigating that has to go on into that. Or looking at this oak, I can see a bleeding canker on the trunk of this. But is that really, what is causing that bleeding? Is it a boring pest? Is it some kind of disease? And it takes a little bit of investigation, digging into to see what is going on a lot of these issues. But you can see, there's a lot of different symptoms, a lot of different things going on with all these trees that people call us out to look at. And it's up to us to kind of figure out what's going on. But a lot of different species of trees and shrubs, and a lot of different issues that are going on. So one of the first things we try and do is just kind of say, hey, where does this fall into the grand scheme of things? Is this a biotic issue? Talking about a living organism that's causing the problems on the plant? Or is it abiotic? Is it something in the environment that's causing these issues on these plants? And that's something that takes, some investigation. You got to go out and look at the plant. Do I actively see some kind of pest on there? Am I seeing some signs, some mushrooms, things like that? Or am I just seeing symptoms? Am I seeing, some kind of plant deformity? What am I really looking at? So there's all kinds of abiotic disorders that are out there that can affect the way a plant looks, whether that's water deficiencies or overwatering, soil compaction, soil properties themselves, pH affects the availability of nutrients, um, chemical injury, or even looking at salts in the soil, mechanical injury, sunlight, temperature, wind, air pollution, lighting. These all have an effect on plants and can cause similar symptoms to what we would expect from a pest or disease. There's also a ton of biotic pests or agents of disease out there. We're very familiar with insects. We're going to focus on insects today, but that's not all that's really out there causing problems. There's mites, fungi, bacteria, mycoplasmas, viruses, nematodes, taller plants. There's a ton of living biotic organisms that all kind of have their favorite plants that they like to go after that cause problems on trees. And so, how do we know what's what? How do we kind of figure out what's going on? Um, and so, one way that like to think about it is just kind of categorizing those pest issues or those disease issues. Since we're focusing on insects today, um, how would I categorize insect pests? If I'm going out there and looking at a problem on a tree, there's different ways I can categorize those insects. The first would just be, if I'm out there, I see an insect, I can say, hey, in this example, I'm looking at an oleander aphid. So I know, you know, what family I know what order that belongs to. It belongs into Hemiptera, and I can go all the way down to exact species identification. Or maybe I'm just looking at the host plant. So if I'm out there looking at roses, um, I know, hey, there's certain pests on roses that I want to look for. Or I can categorize it by the type of feeding damage, their feeding pattern that those insects are doing. Are they defoliating the plant, kind of munching on those leaves and feeding on the foliage? Are they sap feeders? So do they have some kind of piercing, sucking mouth parts where they're putting their mouth parts in the plant and feeding on the xylem or the phloem? Are they borers? Do they cause galls? Or are they actually living within the foliage tissue? Are they foliage miners? And that's kind of where the way we're gonna categorize our insect pests today is we're gonna categorize them by their feeding patterns. And we're just gonna go through, we're gonna kind of look at the major pests that I'm currently dealing with for each of these different feeding patterns today. So to start, we'll look at our defoliators. So we have foliage feeding caterpillars, sawflies, leaf and flea beetles, and weevils. Those are kind of the major defoliators that you're dealing with in the home landscape. So just to start off with, very common pests here that have been in California for a long time. I'll let you guys think about what these are for a second before I tell you. But these are foliage feeders. These are eucalyptus tortoise beetles. Been in California for 30 years now, and were a major problem when they were first introduced. So these were first discovered down in Southern California in Riverside County in 1998. And the eucalyptus beetle, which you can see here in the top right, there's two different beetles that we're going to start with. So the eucalyptus tortoise beetle is this one in the top right hand corner. You can see the adults are brown with this blackish mottling on them. And the larvae like to hang out under loose bark during the day, and they come out and feed at nighttime. There has been a parasitoid that was released for control of eucalyptus tortoise beetle, but it's never actually been recovered in field surveys. Its closely related sibling, eucalyptus leaf beetle, was found in 2003. So just 5 years after the tortoise beetle came in, another leaf beetle came in on eucalyptus. Once again, started in Southern California and it spread all the way up north. And then when this one was introduced, it was really a huge issue on commercially grown foliage eucalyptus. So there's a big foliage eucalyptus production in San Diego, and this was a huge problem down there. As you can see, the coloring on the adult is kind of this gray, grayish color with some light spots, some light mottling on it, contrasted to that brown of the tortoise beetle. And the immatures, the eucalyptus leaf beetle, are daytime feeders. So one easy way to distinguish between these two foliage feeders on eucalyptus was just when you're out there seeing those immatures feeding. So are they feeding during the daytime? Are they feeding at nighttime? An easy way to tell them apart. If you go on to UCIPM, there's a great chart showing you susceptibility of eucalyptus species to different eucalyptus pests, including the beetles. But that's kind of just where I wanted to start. As you can see here on my finger, on the bottom one, that's the eucalyptus tortoise beetle that we already talked about. But there's this new one right above there that's larger. And anybody know what that one's called for you in Southern California? I'm sure you guys have come across this one already. It's the dotted Paropsin leaf beetle, Paropsis autumnaria. And this is a new guy. So this was first discovered in 2022, so about 3 years ago. Started in LA County and is rapidly spread throughout Southern California. This year, it really kind of exploded in Ventura County. I've gotten a lot of calls about this pest from everybody in Ventura saying, hey, it's here in Ventura now. What do we do? And we'll get to that in just a second, but very, very rapid spread of this guy. And these guys are voracious feeders and can very quickly defoliate a eucalyptus tree. So in its native range, these guys actually do have a great biological control agent that keeps it in check. However, we don't have that option here in California. That parasitic fly is not here in California. There's some talk. I'm working with some of my colleagues about trying to do some research and getting it introduced into California. So if any of you have $1 million lying around, that's about what it'll cost to do the research to get this introduced into California. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you guys have that spare money to help out with this guy. We'd love to get it under control. But it's new and it's causing a lot of issues. The adults, pretty easy to identify, bigger than the other beetles that you're going to find on eucalyptus, and they have that yellow and orange markings on them. On here it says 2 generations a year. I believe it actually probably has 3 or 4 generations a year, just depending on where you are. You see, essentially starting in the springtime, going all the way through the fall. It's just continuous production of these guys on eucalyptus. The larvae go through 4 instars, and they have this pretty distinct coloration on them, big black heads with this line, black line going down the back of their bodies. And once they're done feeding, they actually drop to the soil to pupate. And so when you have a tree that's severely infested, you'll actually see thousands of these larvae dropping from the tree, dropping from the foliage, going down to pupate in the soil underneath. And it is, I don't want to say it's spectacular to see, but it is kind of amazing to see just how many larvae are on this tree and they're all falling down. It's just kind of raining down these beetle larvae for them to pupate in the soil. And their egg cluster, as you can see down here in the bottom right-hand side, is pretty unique. So they lay this cluster of eggs of about 20 to 100 in kind of this concentric circle around the stem of the eucalyptus branch near the end. In that middle picture here, this is actually what it looks like when all those eggs are hatching. I've been out looking at eucalyptus a few times and have actually witnessed many times that egg cluster hatching, and that's what that middle picture is just 30 or 40 of those eggs hatching all at one time, coming out and making this massive larval ball. But here's what it can do. So I showed you this picture on the left-hand side earlier. This is what happens or can happen to eucalyptus in a severe infestation. You can get complete defoliation of a eucalyptus tree within a matter of a month or two. In high populations, they will strip a tree before you know what's going on. So this tree has started to grow back, but it was essentially completely defoliated. And on the right-hand side here, here's just a little bit of a closer up picture of damage on a eucalyptus, just what little bit is left there that they haven't eaten. So here's all the hosts that I have found this on so far here in Southern California. It's essentially every eucalyptus species. I have found every life stage of dotted props and leaf beetle. Some hosts are not as susceptible as others. So some, even though the beetle's there feeding, you don't get high populations that are building up. I haven't quite put together a list of how susceptible the different hosts are, but essentially, if you have a eucalyptus tree, it is a potential host for this beetle. So that brings us to management. That's what everybody wants to know about this beetle is, how do I manage it? I have several people that have called me and said, hey, it's raining down beetles from this tree and getting into my pool and clogging the pool filter, and I have to go out and clean my pool filter every single day because I have hundreds of beetle larvae in there. How can I manage this pest? And the best I can tell them is I don't have a great answer for you yet. So we know, more well-established, properly maintained eucalyptus are going to be able to tolerate extensive feeding better. So even though there's thousands of beetles on the tree, if the tree is properly maintained, that eucalyptus is going to survive. It's going to resprout and make it through. But what we don't have for any of these leaf beetles on eucalyptus is we don't have great research on control measures in the landscape. So we know in commercial foliage production that you can go with a soil drench of a systemic insecticide. Disclaimer here, neonicotinoids are not available for homeowner use. It is required if you are going to apply them that you have to have a license. So I meant to take that out of here and I forgot to do that. So neonicotinoids are not available for homeowner use. You have to be a licensed applicator to apply systemic neonicotinoids, which limits your options. So, it works great in a commercial production, but we don't have the research that shows that it's going to work in a landscape setting. So with the systemic pesticide, the tree has to be able to take it up and spread it throughout its canopy into the foliage. And so if you're doing something like a soil drench or something like that with a systemic pesticide, how fast is a 60-foot tall eucalyptus going to take that up? How long is it going to stay in the leaves? We don't have that research right now. So Best we can do is make some general recommendations. If you follow that QR code, it'll take you to management of Eucalyptus tortoise beetle. And that's what we're basing our beetle management on right now. There are foliar options that work. But once again, if you have a established eucalyptus, you're not going to go out and do a foliar spray on a 60-foot tall eucalyptus, a 30-foot tall eucalyptus, because you're going to get too much drift. You're going to get off-target sprays, and it's not recommended. And because of that, it's not recommended to do a foliar spray on an established eucalyptus tree. So as far as options go, what that leaves you left is looking at the biology of this beetle. And I don't have it on this slide, but we know that they pupate in the soil. And so that is where we want to concentrate our management on this beetle. So there are options for things like nematodes that can potentially control this beetle in the soil while it's pupating. We have not done those studies yet. I'm in talks of getting some of those studies up off the ground, but we don't have that research right now. So best I can do is send you to UCIPM page and look at general tortoise beetle management to give you an idea of what kinds of things can work for management of this beetle. A lot of eucalyptus pests out there. Just a quick plug for UCIPM again. If you're having problems on eucalyptus, go to this page. All right, moving on to sap feeders. This is where a lot of you guys have issues and are constantly saying, you know, how do I get rid of mealybugs and scale? Those are probably the two I deal with the most. But you have aphids, psyllids, whiteflies, scale, leaf hoppers, true bugs, thrips. I lump these all together in what I call sap feeders. Thrips and mites, not really true sap feeders, but lump them in here just because this is the best category that they go in. So today we're going to talk about this pest issue. This is the one that I've been hearing, the scale problem that I've been hearing most from landscapers that they're dealing with. Some of you up in the Bay Area may recognize this down here in Southern California. If you live along the coast, Long Beach, Newport, somewhere in that area, I'm sure you've seen this at some point. This is tulip tree scale. So it goes after tulip tree, magnolia, or closely related species in the magnolia family. You'll also find it on gardenia and linden. But these scales excrete a lot of honeydew, and that is one of the main issues with this pest is how much honeydew they produce. So you can see in that picture on the right, you can actually see a honeydew drop kind of in the middle there coming down. You actually see a big drop of honeydew coming from this scale. You can also see all that city mold, all that black fungi growing all over the branch there. They build up into numbers very quickly, and you know, at a certain point, they can weaken or kill younger trees, and even established trees can die from severe infestations of tulip tree scale. So generally, you just kind of start off, you'll kind of see plants, you know, loses a little bit of vigor. So you just think, not growing as much as it used to. Then you'll start to see some leaf chlorosis and some leaf drop. And ultimately, they'll start killing back those younger branches, which leads to the branches pushing out kind of new growth. They'll push out some new distorted growth, trying to get that foliage back. But eventually, in high infestations, it'll lead to tree death. So first up in kind of the Bay Area in 1982. So it's been up in Northern California for quite a while now. But in Southern California, it wasn't really that big of a deal until about 10 years ago. Um, and so these pictures are from Southern California. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side, you can just see that kind of shine on the sidewalk and the asphalt. And that is all honeydew from the scale. So that is all that black, sticky, shiny substance on the sidewalks and on the street is just all that honeydew from these scale insects. And you can see here on the right hand side how bad that infestation was on that magnolia. So they have about one generation a year. Possible sometimes they can have a second generation a year, but generally looking at one generation a year. And they over as kind of second instar nymphs. And essentially once spring comes along, things warm up. That's when they get active again. So they'll kind of break this winter dormancy, actively start feeding again, and quickly start creating problems for you. So as they go through their life cycle, they break dormancy in the spring, they're feeding, going through their life cycle. They get to being the adult stage, males will come and mate with them, and then that female will give live birth. So she doesn't lay eggs like normal scales do. She actually gives live birth, and it can be up to 3,000 crawlers. So if you have a few 1 year, you don't notice your populations. They overwinter, and that next year, maybe, those 10 or 15 females that you had, if she's giving birth to 3,000 for each one, you're quickly looking at hundreds of thousands of scale on your tree within a year or two. So populations can build up very, very rapidly on these trees. Mostly what we see it on here in California is magnolias. But here you can just see adult females, and you can see that first instar crawler stage. That crawler stage is what's actually moving on the plant. So she gives live birth. Those crawlers crawl out from under her little shell, and they crawl on the branch, find their own spot to feed. Once they find that spot, that's where they spend the rest of their life. They're sitting there feeding on that one spot on that branch. So scale management. First thing to do is control ants. We're going to talk about ant management after this, because that's the question I always get. Oh, you're telling me I have to control ants to control my scale. How do I control ants? So we'll talk about that. But if you can control the ants, biological controls can do their job. There's a ton of different biological controls that go after this scale. And so by controlling those ants, those biological control agents can actually help get that population under control. Biological control itself may not be enough in severe infestations. So what you want to do is, as those nymphs are breaking their dormancy, that's when we want to think about doing some kind of spray. So we want to spray as kind of trees are waking up and those nymphs are waking up. We want to do a spray of like a horticultural oil or a soap, something like that. Then we also want to attack that first instar crawler phase in the fall and spray that as well. So if you're having problems, it's probably going to take you a couple sprays a year with something like a horticultural oil or a soap to get these under control. So you want to attack the crawler stage, which is the most susceptible stage. And you also want to attack those overwintering nymphs as they're starting to wake up. And systemic insecticides can be very effective, but once again, you have to have a license to apply those. So I'm not going to focus too much on those. And control. We've done quite a few presentations on ant control. So I'm going to stick to ant control in the landscape and not talk about it in the home setting. So ants and hemipteran pests have this mutualistic relationship where that hemipteran pest, whether it's a scale, aphid, whatever it is, they're feeding on that phloem. They're getting a lot of, it's essentially a direct pipeline into a straw, and they can't process everything. So they have to quickly get rid of a lot of sugary things that they're feeding on. And so they produce honeydew, which is a great food source for ants, and in particular, Argentine ants. And so ants get food, but what do those hemipteran pests get? How are they benefiting? So in Southern California, we're mostly talking about Argentine ants providing, protection of hemipteran pests, but it's not just Argentine ants. This just happens to be the most common ant that is farming these hemipteran pests. This and the next slide are from Mark Hoddle at UC Riverside, doing research on Asian citrus psyllid in citrus orchards. And he essentially found that on these citrus trees, you can get over 1 million visits from ants every single day. These ants just going up and down, feeding on that honeydew from those hemipteran pests. And what does that do? It disrupts that biological control. So here you can see Camarixia radiata. That's that little wasp that kind of looks like a little fly. It's a parasitoid of Asian citrus psyllid. It lays its eggs inside that nymph and develops inside there and essentially eats that psyllid from the inside out. But those ants are protecting those psyllids. And so as that parasitoid comes in, those ants latch onto it. And what they're trying to do is decapitate those wasps to protect the psyllid. So they're, sitting here farming their little psyllids and protecting them from any predators that come along. So greatly decreasing the effectiveness of natural control of these hemipteran pests. So there's about 200 ant species that are found in California. Most of them aren't any big issue and are actually a benefit in most instances. They're kind of tilling up the soil, creating a little bit of aeration, breaking things down, and even controlling some pest species. But identification of ants is very important when we're talking about control. So there's various ant keys that you can use to identify your ant species. Once again, UCIPM, great resource. There's keys that you can just look up and walk through the steps, just looking at pictures and things from essentially a piece of paper, or there's keys that will walk you through it one step at a time as well. And so all those options are here on UCIPM. Scan the QR code if you need help with your ant identification, and just answer one question at a time to get at what ant species you have so you know how to properly control it. So ants can cause damage in a lot of ways. We're talking about them protecting your honeydew producing insects and preventing biological control from being effective. But they can also be a nuisance pest that bite or sting, invade your house. Things like carpenter ants can tunnel into the wood and actually cause damage to the interior of trees. And then certain fire ants and a few other ant species will actually chew on the bark of trees and plants and can actually completely girdle a tree and kill it as well. So most of the time we see that with things like fire ants. So how do we manage these ants? You know, if we want to control our hemipteran pests, our scales, our mealybugs, you have to be able to control the ants so that biological control can do its job. And you're never going to completely eliminate ants from an outdoor area. They're a natural part of the ecosystem, and for the most part, we want ants in our landscapes. So what we want to do is focus our efforts on where ants are a direct pest. So where are they actually protecting those honeydew producing insects? That's where we want to focus our control measures on. And we want to start generally in late spring, early winter when ants are less abundant. So they're just kind of waking up, starting to go out and forage again. They're not reproducing a lot, so their colony is fairly small. And that's really when we want to target our ant population. So go out in the spring. You generally know, like, it had issues last year on this plant. Next year, I want to get a head start on it and try and control that pest and those ants earlier. So how do you do that? Cultural controls. First thing you want to do is kind of create what we call ant bridges. So prune foliage off the ground. You know, if you're having scale issues on a certain plant, prune that plant away from other plants so that you can't have ants going from one plant to another plant, or from your house to the plant and vice versa. And prune the foliage off the ground. So essentially, you're forcing those ants to go up the tree one way to get to their food source. Once you've done that, then you can use something like tanglefoot around the trunk of your tree to prevent those ants from going up and down. But generally, that'll work, but it's not going to give you as great a control as you like. So generally, with ant control, we have to do a few different methods. And your other method of control is baiting. So when we're talking about ant baiting, we're talking about worker ants going out and foraging, collecting some kind of toxicant and bringing it back to the colony to kill the entire colony. That's what we want. We want to kill the colony. If we're just killing those workers that are out there doing their job, it's not going to control the ants. You actually have to go through and kill the entire colony and that queen to provide the level of control that you want. So this isn't quick. It may take 2, 3, 4 weeks to actually get the results that you're looking for. But once again, we want to start this when colony's smaller. And so when we're out there baiting, we want to put our baits in places where ants are kind of naturally foraging. So kind of near their trails, at the base of trees, somewhere like that. If you're just piling up your bait right around the nest, it can actually be a deterrent for ants. So you kind of want to put it where ants are going to be naturally feeding. And it's also important to know that bait effectiveness varies by the active ingredient, the ant species, availability of alternative food, and the type of bait you're using, and that it can change seasonally. So when we're talking about the type of bait we're using, generally we're talking about protein baits versus sugar baits. And so protein baits are, like the name sounds, they're a protein-based bait that ants need to produce offspring. So protein is very important for ants to produce offspring. So generally in the springtime, they're looking for more protein-based food sources. As the season goes on, they start to switch that to sugar or carbohydrate-based food sources. So for things like Argentine ants, your sugar baits are going to be great throughout the year. But in the springtime, they may actually be looking for a source of protein. So your protein-based baits are going to be great in the springtime. fire ant baits. If you're having problems with fire ants, um, fire ant baits are slightly different. So you want to check the label and make sure that it actually says fire ants. And for fire ants, generally, they're using a soybean based oil, which is a lure for those fire ants. So just a slightly different bait for fire ants. So make sure you're always checking a product label um, to make sure that the ant species that you need to control is on the label. One thing that you can do at home to kind of create your own bait is use a borate based bait. And so for that, you can just take some borax, mix it with some sugar, and put that in some kind of um, baiting device and put that out. Make sure it's not accessible to pets or children, and put that out and use that as your base. So it's fairly easy to use in a home setting. Um, and you can find this recipe on the UCIPM website. All right, borers. I know Dr. Nubea Berman recently gave a talk on borers. So I'm going to skip kind of the beetle borers, and I'm actually going to focus on this group right here. Anybody recognize this? They look really cool. I think the adults are really cool to look at, but the larvae can be problematic. And these are clearwing moths. So there's a variety of hosts depending on which moth species it is, but generally sycamores with sycamore borer. Sycamore borer goes after oaks as well, but you'll find alder, ash, birch, the different stone fruits all have clearwing moths that will attack them. And what the larvae do is they feed on the inner bark, which stimulates this formation of what we call cork cambium, just not detrimental to the tree most of the time. And so generally when we're thinking about clearwing moths, they're feeding, but they're not going to actively be causing any significant harm to the tree in most instances. And we'll talk about when that matters. So sycamore borer here, that was a picture we looked at earlier. You can see damage on the right-hand side. You can kind of see that gnarled growth on the sycamore trunk. And it's just kind of in there feeding on that inner bark layer and forming this gnarled bark, but it's not killing the tree. Tree is actively growing. It's not causing any significant damage. But peach tree borer can be a significant problem on prunus species. And so down here you can see all this sapping from the prunus tree trying to fight off this borer infestation. Western poplar clearwing moth, another species that you might find here in California. But as far as life cycle for these guys go, females will lay eggs on the bark of trees, so on the bark in kind of cracks. Those eggs will hatch in about 1 to 4 weeks. Larvae will bore into the bark and takes about a year for them to develop. Then they'll come out, they pupate kind of right out the bark layer, and then they'll come out as adults. And so for inspection, for actually seeing what you got going on with clearwing moth, first thing you want to do is look at the bark. And in this top picture here, you can see this pupa sticking out of the bark of the tree, and that's what you want to look for clearwing moth. You can also get pheromone traps for monitoring clearwing moth, but they're only available for ash and peach tree borers. So for sycamore borer, there isn't a pheromone lure available. I've been trying to work on getting some developed, but it hasn't happened yet. But your pheromone lures you use to time adult activity so you know when to apply your management. So for the most part, management isn't recommended for clearwing moth. They're not causing severe enough damage. The bark might look kind of gnarled and everything, but they're not girdling the trees. They're not damaging structural integrity. The trees can handle it. Um, that is until, we're talking about um, peach tree borer. But biological controls, there's naturally occurring predators and parasitoids out there that attack clearwing moth. Um, and you can also use nematodes. It's very labor intensive to apply nematodes to tree trunks when you have clearwing moth. So you actually have to go out and inject a solution of nematodes into each individual hole on the tree trunk to provide good control. So generally not recommended, but nematode soil applications work great for peach tree borer. You apply those directly to the soil when those borers are pupating in the soil to provide control. We talked about monitoring the adults. So you're doing that so about 2 weeks after you're starting to catch adults, you want to go out there and time your trunk applications to about 2 weeks after you're starting to catch adults, because that's when those females are going to be laying eggs on the trunk, and you can go out there and spray the trunks of the trees to kill those eggs. Gall formers, really cool, a ton of them on oaks. And oak gall wasps, I threw them in here just because I find them fascinating because there's so many different kinds on oak trees. They can occur on all parts of the oak tree themselves. Just a ton of different ones. So just kind of scanning through these, you can look at them. So for the most part, oak gall wasps not causing a whole lot of issues, but some can actually cause the plant to secrete kind of what we call nectar, which can cause sooty mold and encourage ants. So in that instance, we may want to think about doing something. But what do you do? For gall wasps, generally, you just provide good cultural control, and galls aren't really going to cause any significant injury to your oak trees. So management isn't recommended. There are a lot of natural enemies and things that will go after gall wasps. So as long as you're controlling those ants, once again, let biological control do its job, and you don't have to worry too much about your gall wasp issue. Leaf miners, kind of last group I wanted to cover here, foliage miners. So within foliage miners, we group leaf miners like citrus leaf miner and tit miners, which I'll throw pine tit moth in here. Not really a true leaf miner, but I threw it in here anyway. So citrus leaf miner, question I get most often, find it on a variety of citrus hosts, and you can tell, they cause this very characteristic mining tunnels in between the wax layer and the leaf, and this distorted growths. It's a small moth that sits there and mines, the larva mines within the leaf. That's why it's called a leaf miner. But skipping a little bit ahead because I'm running out of time. Monitoring is very important for leaf miners. There's not a lot of great control options out there for leaf miners. And so one of the things that you can do is use pheromone traps. He's very widely commercially available. So you can go out there and put out your pheromone traps to attract males to know when to possibly do insecticide application. So they are going to catch males. They're not going to do enough catching to do any control itself, but it will give you an idea of what's out there. They're really not causing any significant injury to your citrus tree, so generally management isn't needed. There are some parasites and some parasitoids that will go after them. But in homeowner situations, they're just causing a little bit of leaf deformity. You're still going to get your citrus out of this, so it's not necessary to do any kind of management in most instances. If you do need to do some kind of chemical management, you don't have a lot of great options out there. So even things like systemics that we talked about for your hemipteran pests that work good, your systemics don't work very well on leaf miner management. So not recommended at all for your systemics. What you have to do is try and time it to do something like an azadirachtin or spinosad to get those young larvae. So after those moths are being active, after you start catching them in your trap, once again, you're going to time it for a couple weeks after you start catching to time your insecticide applications on your foliage. So I know I went through things pretty quickly there at the end just to get through time-wise, but I want to thank you guys. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. Always happy to answer emails.
Thank you so much, Chris, for such a really extensive amount of insects mostly covered for trees. And there are so many more that I'm sure you could have talked about, but that was great. Thank you.